This video is going to serve as a way to get practice graphing with Microsoft Excel. So when you open up Microsoft Excel, it's going to give you a blank spreadsheet. You can start filling in your data that you collect from a lab. The data set I'm going to work with looks at the relationship between mass, measured in kilograms, and velocity, measured in meters per second. So just to make sure that my data is nice and clearly organized, in those top two cells, I type in the variable, space, open parentheses, the unit of measure, close parentheses. I do that for both of these. Then underneath that, I can start to fill in my data. Now I have my data from somewhere else, so I'm just going to quickly type it in. Now, right now, I'm typing it in, so it's 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. But Excel is assuming that that's not what I want. It's just defaulting to its general format. Because I want that number of places past the decimal, I'm selecting those cells, selecting this drop-down menu, and selecting number. I can change how many places past the decimal that I want it to report. So that way I can have the correct number of significant figures. So I can increase the number if I have more precision, or I can decrease the number if I have less. And then I'm just going to continue with that. So my data is set up there, and then same for the velocities. It's going to be kind of the same issue. Right now I have 22.4, and it defaults to just recording as many non-zero digits as I have, which is why it's not rounding. But just to make sure, I'm going to select those cells again, drop down menu, number, and make sure it's going to be one place past the decimal, which is the data that I have. So once I have all of my data that I've collected from the lab set in, I can select all of my data. If I want to actually have this as like a full-on data table set up, I can set that up and format it as a table. A keyboard shortcut for that is to hold the control button and hit T. That way it's going to create a table. It's selecting all of the data that I've already selected here, and it's going to be using my header. So that first column is mass measured in kilograms. The second column is velocity measured in meters per second. When I click on that, it auto spaces it so that way all of my data and language fits within those cells. It has these shaded cells, so it's really easy for me to identify my data, particularly if there's a whole lot of columns or a whole lot of rows. It's really easy for me to set that up. With this still highlighted though, I can set up a graph. So I can go back to this top ribbon where it says Insert. Click on that, and then over here, I have all of my charts. Now, you can deliberately select whichever style you want. You can allow Excel to recommend a type of chart, but my recommendation will be with discrete data points, select a scatter plot. When we set this up, it's going to graph it so that way the left column is on your x-axis, the right column is on the y-axis. But we don't know that for a fact. That's why we need to put axes labels. This plus sign here will allow us to add chart elements. So clicking on that, it's already selected our axes, but not our axis titles. So I'm going to click on that, and then it's going to give me two text boxes that I can type in my axis titles for. I can click my data labels if I want to know exactly what those points are. I find that that complicates my graph, so I don't typically have that. But what I do like to include is a trend line, because from that I can do a linear regression to figure out a mathematical model that represents my data. Other things I'll need to change here. My title. I don't love it, so I'm going to change it. The relationship I was looking at was the relationship between velocity and mass. So it's velocity versus mass. My dependent variable versus my independent variable, or my y-axis versus my x-axis. Speaking of, for my y-axis, I should probably replace that text box that says axis title with my variable that is on my y-axis, velocity, measured in meters per second, and then do the same thing to my x-axis, which is going to be mass, measured in kilograms. Once this is set up, my graph is almost fully complete. I can drag these side boxes to make it bigger, make it easier to see. And one other thing I want to do is actually have what that linear regression is going to be. So I click directly on my trend line, and then I right click on it. I want to format that trend line. When I format the trend line, it comes over here and gives me a whole lot of these menus. If I had a different type of relationship other than linear, I could change it there. But this is a linear relationship, so I'm going to leave it like that. And then down here, I can rename it if I want, but really what I'm focusing on is down here. I want to display the equation on the chart. This is the mathematical model written in the format of y equals mx plus b that represents my data. However, this is just a mathy way to approach it. One of the reasons why we construct these graphs, particularly in science, is to look at the relationship between our variables. So that's where we need to talk about what variables on the y-axis, our x-axis, and what is the physical meaning of the slope and the y-intercept. But those are topics for another time. The purpose of this video was just to set up how to set up a graph in Microsoft Excel and end up with the mathematical model that we can get from a linear regression using our trend line.